The board is still on the wall. You made it carefully, images of the life that was coming, arranged with intention. Some version of you stood in front of it and felt the pull of what was possible. That feeling was real. It was not a mistake. The board on that wall is evidence of something true about you. You are capable of wanting something larger than your current circumstances. But the month ended. The number in your account was the same. The gap stayed exactly the size it was. Here is what nobody inside that world will tell you. The problem was never your belief. The problem was that belief alone is not the mechanism. It was never the mechanism. The people who built that industry around vision boards and high-vibration thinking and just trust the process, they were not lying to you about the destination. They were lying to you about the engine, or more precisely, they were ignorant of it. There is a specific internal state that precedes financial breakthroughs, not a mood, not optimism, a precise, repeatable, neurologically distinct mode of operating. The people who quietly accumulate real wealth seem to inhabit it almost by default. They do not talk about it in the terms you have heard. Some of them cannot even describe it consciously, but it runs underneath everything they do, every decision they make, every room they choose to walk into. You have felt this state before, briefly, in fragments. You just did not know what you were touching when you felt it. What you are about to hear is not about believing harder. It is about something far more specific, far more honest, and far more repeatable than anything the belief and receive world ever handed you. By the time you finish this, the gap will look different to you, not smaller yet, different. The way a locked door looks different once you are holding the right key. Chapter 1. Vision boards do not build portfolios. Every civilization that has ever risen left behind the same quiet mystery. Among the many, there were always a few, not the most schooled, not the most gifted by birth, not the loudest voices in the room, but a particular kind of person who seemed to receive outcomes from life that others, trying just as hard, simply could not access. Across centuries, across cultures, across languages with no shared root, this pattern repeats without exception. And the most fascinating part is not that these people existed. The most fascinating part is what they shared, not tactics, not connections, something internal, something operational, something about the specific state they were in when they made their moves. You have heard pieces of this described your whole life, but what you have been handed, the posters, the boards, the morning affirmations, the feeling good about money exercises, that is not the original. That is a copy of a copy of a copy, stripped of the one element that made it work. This chapter is about what was stripped out, and why getting it back changes everything. Here is a scene. Picture it clearly. Her name is Renata, 29 years old, a graphic designer, renting a one-bedroom in a city that costs more each year than the last. 3 years ago, Renata found the manifestation community. She went all in. Her vision board is the most considered piece of work in her apartment. She spent a full Sunday on it, magazine cutouts arranged by category, a section for income, a section for the house she wants, a section for what she calls freedom. She journals every morning. She reads her affirmations aloud. She genuinely believes on most mornings that what she wants is coming. She is not lazy. She is not negative. She is doing everything the books told her to do. Her net worth today is within $300 of where it was when she started. Now picture someone else. His name is 𝗜𝗏𝗧𝗘. He built a regional logistics company worth $40 million before he sold it. He has since invested in 11 businesses. 4 failed. 3 are performing. 4 are exceptional. You would not describe Derek as a man who radiates positivity. He does not journal. His walls are bare. When he is about to close a significant deal, his preparation ritual involves a cup of bad coffee, a legal pad, and 45 minutes of sitting with what he calls the weight of the thing. Not excitement, not affirmations. A particular focused discomfort that he has learned over decades to recognize as the state where his best decisions get made. He told a colleague once that he does not try to feel good before a deal. He tries to feel precise. Renata is transmitting static. Derek is transmitting signal. And neither of them fully understands why. That question, why one person's belief produces results and another person's identical effort produces nothing, is the open door this entire book walks through. Hold that question for now. Do not answer it yet, because to answer it too quickly is to make the same mistake the manifestation industry made when it sold you the shortcut. Here is what the manifestation industry did. It took a real phenomenon, the documented, repeatable reality that the internal state of a person at the moment of decision shapes the quality of that decision, which shapes outcomes, which shapes financial reality, and it reduced that phenomenon down to its most photogenic element: visualization, positive feeling, belief. It kept the feeling and threw away the frequency. You know this already. Some part of you knows this. You have felt the difference between believing something and knowing something. They feel different in your body. Belief sits in your chest a little loosely. Knowing sits somewhere lower and steadier, without applause, without warmth, almost like a fact your body has already accepted before your brain caught up. The manifestation industry told you to generate belief. What actually produces results is something closer to that second thing. The quiet, anchored, almost business-like state that does not need to perform its own conviction because it has moved past needing to. Revisit the shape of your life before these last 3 years unfolded. Not in terms of circumstances, in terms of how you operated internally. When you pictured the life you wanted, what did it feel like? Did it feel like longing? Did it feel like excitement? Did it feel like you were watching something through glass that you were not sure would ever open? That feeling, that quality of emotional distance between you and the thing is the signal, not a moral failing, not a lack of faith. It is diagnostic information. It is telling you the frequency was off. And no amount of additional visualization fixes a frequency problem. You do not fix a broken radio station by turning up the volume on the broadcast. You fix it by tuning the signal. Static is not silence. That is the part that makes this so hard to see. Static is loud. Static feels like something. When Renata sits in front of her vision board, she feels something. She feels hope and longing and sometimes even joy. That emotional charge feels like progress. It feels like the work is working. But hope and longing are both forms of static because both of them place the desired outcome at a distance. Hope says it might come. Longing says it is not here. And a broadcast that keeps saying the thing is not here yet is, neurologically and practically, doing the opposite of what you intend. This is not abstract. This has a mechanical explanation. Your brain, at any given moment, is scanning your environment and your own behavior for evidence that confirms your operating assumptions. This is not a flaw. It is how human cognition maintains efficiency. It does not reevaluate reality from scratch every morning. It runs on a model. The model is built from the emotional data you feed it repeatedly and consistently. If the dominant emotional data you feed it is characterized by longing and distance and the thing is not here, yet your brain builds a model of you as a person for whom the thing is not here, then it filters your perception, your decisions, your risk tolerance, and your social behavior through that model. It is not punishing you. It is being precise. It is using the frequency you gave it. Derek does not feel good before a deal. He feels precise. What he has accidentally trained himself into through decades of making decisions under real pressure is the emotional state that says the outcome is already being processed, not wished for, processed. There is a difference between a person who wants to close a deal and a person who is closing a deal. The body knows the difference. The brain knows the difference. And the people in the room, consciously or not, feel the difference. Later on, we will reach an idea about confidence that pushes directly against the usual belief. Once you grasp that turn, it changes how you act in every financial conversation you have going forward. But right now, understand this. Renata's board is not the problem. Renata's journaling is not the problem. The problem is that the entire structure of what she was taught trains her to stay in the feeling of wanting. And wanting is a feeling that, by definition, does not already have the thing. Every morning she sits with her board, she is reinforcing the emotional signature of a woman who does not yet have what she is looking at. The board is a picture of the gap, and she is rehearsing the gap every day with devotion. That is what passive visualization without the correct emotional state produces. Not movement, rehearsal of the distance. The manifestation industry is not evil. Most of the people inside it are genuinely trying to help. But it committed one critical error that costs real people real years of real effort. It confused the vehicle with the engine. Visualization is a vehicle. Positive emotion is a vehicle. The engine is the specific quality of the internal state, that precise, already processing, low-frequency hum that high performers access, usually without knowing what to call it, in the window just before a significant financial event occurs. You are going to learn to call it something. You are going to learn to recognize it, enter it on purpose, and sustain it long enough for it to start shaping your decisions and your perception. Not by feeling better, by transmitting a clear signal. There is a window. Most people never know it exists. It opens before breakthroughs, before the deal, before the conversation, before the offer, before the opportunity that looks like luck but is not luck. It opens in the people who have, knowingly or not, tuned their internal frequency to something precise and consistent. That window is the subject of this book, and the first step to standing inside it is understanding why everything you were handed before was handing you static. Belief without the correct emotional frequency is static. It transmits nothing. It receives nothing. And no vision board in the world changes that. What changes it is knowing the difference between the feeling of wanting something and the state of processing it, and choosing, deliberately and repeatedly, to live closer to the second one. That is not positivity, that is precision. And precision, not hope, is where financial reality actually moves. Chapter 2. You have been manifesting the wrong emotion. Precision moves money. That sentence ended the last chapter. If it landed correctly, something in you either nodded or pushed back. Either way, hold that reaction. What comes next is going to reframe everything you think you know about why your efforts, your visualizations, your affirmations, your sincere and exhausting attempts at belief have not yet produced what you are reaching for. Here is what nearly every person practicing manifestation believes. They believe the key is wanting something badly enough. They believe intensity of desire is the engine. They carry that desire into every practice session, every vision board moment, every quiet prayer before sleep. And they are wrong. Not partially wrong. Not wrong in a minor, adjustable way. Completely, structurally wrong in a way that guarantees the result they are trying to escape. The painful irony is this. The more desperately you want something, the more precisely you are broadcasting the signal that keeps it away. That is not a metaphor yet. By the end of this chapter, you will understand exactly why. And the understanding will cost you a belief you have been defending for years. Think about a radio. Not a streaming app, not a playlist on your phone, but an actual radio dial. When that dial sits between stations, you do not get silence. You get static. Noise that carries no information, no music, no signal worth receiving. Most people who practice manifestation are tuned to static. They are broadcasting a frequency. Something real is being transmitted, but it is scrambled. The channel they are reaching for exists. The signal is out there. But the dial is set just wrong enough that all that energy goes nowhere productive. This is not a flaw in the technique. This is a flaw in the emotional starting point. Now meet 𝗓𝗓𝗓. 𝗓𝗓𝗓 is 31 years old. She works in project coordination for a mid-sized logistics company in Cincinnati, makes $52,000 a year, and has been practicing some form of manifestation for 6 years. She reads the books. She watches the videos. She has a journal with a dedicated section for what she calls her future life, a house with a deep porch, a savings account that does not make her stomach clench, work that does not feel like a slow erosion of something she used to love. She writes these things down every morning. She says them aloud. She genuinely, deeply believes in the process, and yet, 6 years in, 𝗓𝗓𝗓 is in nearly the same financial position she was at 25. The numbers have moved slightly. The feeling has not moved at all. When she sits down to visualize the life she wants, something happens that she has never quite named. The moment she begins to picture the porch, the savings number, the different work, she feels a pull. Not a comfortable pull. A pull that carries an undercurrent of ache, of distance, of the gap between here and there. She feels it as enthusiasm. She has been telling herself it is enthusiasm. It is not enthusiasm. What 𝗓𝗓𝗓 feels every morning is want. Raw, directional want. And want, at its neurological core, is a declaration of absence. Here is the open question this chapter needs you to carry for a few minutes before it resolves. If desire is the fuel for manifestation, why does 𝗓𝗓𝗓's desire not produce results? Hold that. The answer is coming, and it will reframe everything about how you approach your next practice session. Want and certainty feel similar on the surface. They both involve thinking about the future. They both involve emotion. They both involve a vivid picture of something that does not yet exist in your physical life. But they are different channels entirely. They transmit different signals, and the receiving end responds to those signals in opposite ways. The receiving end is every decision you make, every opportunity you notice or miss, every conversation you enter or avoid, every risk you take or decline. Want says, I do not have this. I am far from this. My current state is defined by the distance between me and the thing I need. Certainty says something else entirely. Certainty says, this is already in motion. My job is not to reach for it, but to move toward what is already arriving. The difference in behavior that follows from those two internal states is enormous, measurable, real. Call up the shape of your life before these last 3 years unfolded. Not the general shape of your life, the specific feeling you carried when you thought about money. Was it tight in your chest? Was there a low-grade dread sitting just under your normal functioning, surfacing every time a bill arrived or a paycheck fell short? Think about how you handled that dread. Did you respond with want? Did you sit down and want harder, visualize more intensely, try to push through the anxiety with a louder version of the same practice? If the answer is yes, then you were not practicing manifestation. You were practicing the feeling of lack. You were rehearsing the very emotional state you were trying to exit. This is not a personal failure. This is a design flaw in how the technique gets taught. The manifestation industry has compressed a complex emotional and behavioral process into a single instruction. Just believe. Believe hard. Feel it as if it is real. That instruction is not entirely wrong. There is a core of truth buried in it. But the way most people follow it, they reach for the feeling of having the thing while simultaneously standing in the feeling of not having it. The result is static, two competing signals on the same dial. Your emotional net worth is the sum of the emotional states you spend the most time in, not the states you visit during a 10-minute morning practice. The states you live in across the ordinary hours, while you are in traffic, while you are waiting for a meeting to start, while you are lying awake at 2 in the morning running numbers that do not add up. Those hours are the real broadcast. And for most people, those hours are soaked in want. In the low hum of not enough. In what could be called the poverty frequency. That phrase is not meant harshly. It is meant precisely. The poverty frequency is not about your bank balance. It is about your emotional baseline. You can have $200,000 in savings and still be broadcasting the poverty frequency if your dominant emotional state is scarcity-flavored anxiety. And you can have very little money and be operating on a completely different signal if you have found, even briefly and accidentally, the emotional state that precedes acquisition rather than chases it. Now here is what that state actually feels like. It does not feel like wild excitement. It does not feel like the performed joy of a person who watched too many motivation videos. It feels like the calm a carpenter feels when she has measured twice and is about to cut. Not the excitement of imagining the finished cabinet. The settled, grounded certainty that she knows what she is doing and the action about to happen is correct. There is an ease to it, a professional ease. The body is not braced. The breath is not short. The mind is not racing toward the outcome because the mind trusts the process well enough to stay in the present step. That is the frequency, not wanting, not hoping, not pushing, trusting with enough conviction that the body relaxes into the action rather than straining toward the result. 𝗓𝗓𝗓 does not feel that yet. On her best mornings, she feels excitement that has anxiety underneath it. She is closer than she has ever been to identifying the difference, but she has not identified it yet. Her story is not finished. You will come back to her. As this book keeps moving, we will reach an idea about belief itself that pushes directly against the usual belief. When that point settles, it changes every practice you attempt from that point forward. But for now, the answer to the question this chapter asked you to hold. 𝗓𝗓𝗓's desire does not produce results because desire, when it carries the emotional texture of longing, broadcasts one signal above all others. It broadcasts absence. And what broadcasts absence receives more absence. Not because the universe is punishing her. Because every practical decision she makes from inside that emotional state is slightly miscalibrated. She hesitates when she should act. She overreaches when she should hold steady. She reads neutral situations as threatening. She misses open doors because her attention is fixed on the wall. Want is not your ally. Want is your static. The question worth sitting with now is simple and a little uncomfortable. When you practice manifestation, when you sit down with your journal or close your eyes and picture what you are building toward, what emotion is actually underneath it? Not the surface emotion, not the one you think you are supposed to feel, the one that is actually running. Because that emotion, not your words, not your images, not your intentions, is the signal you are sending. And the signal you are sending is the only thing that decides what comes back. The emotion underneath the wanting is the thing you have to change first. Chapter 3. Billionaires feel rich before the wire clears. Changing the emotion is not the finish line. It is the doorway. And what you find on the other side of that doorway is something the manifestation industry almost never talks about. Because the moment they explain it clearly, the magic evaporates. What is left is something you can actually use. Here is the truth that will stop you mid-sentence if you let it land. The wealthiest people in any room are not hoping their deals close. They have already felt them close, not as a wish. Not as a visualization exercise performed for 10 minutes before breakfast. As a felt certainty that lives in their body before a single dollar has moved. That sounds like something a life coach says to make you feel better. It is not. It is a neurological fact about how the human brain processes decision-making under high stakes. Once you understand the mechanics, you will never look at your own financial hesitation the same way again. The question worth sitting with is this. What exactly are they feeling, and how do they get there before the outcome is real? Hold that question. The answer is coming, and it will be more specific than you expect. There is a man worth knowing, though you will not find his name in a magazine profile or a podcast interview. Call him Marcus. He built his first real estate portfolio in a city most investors had written off. A mid-sized Rust Belt town with crumbling infrastructure and one good hospital. Over 20 years, Marcus acquired 43 commercial properties. He is not famous. He does not have a social media following, but every serious developer in that region knows his name because Marcus closes deals at a rate that makes other investors quietly uncomfortable. What Marcus does before every major negotiation is this. He arrives 30 minutes early. He sits in his car. He closes his eyes, not to visualize the outcome, not to rehearse his talking points. He sits until he finds what he privately calls the settled place. It usually takes about 20 minutes. When he steps out of the car, something about him has changed. The people across the table feel it without being able to name it. His offers are not always the highest, but Marcus closes. He has closed when he should have lost. He has closed when competing buyers had better financing and better relationships with the seller. What is he actually doing in that car? Here is where most people get it wrong. They hear that story and think Marcus is meditating his way to success, doing some kind of spiritual preparation that calls the deal toward him through intention alone. That is the static. That is exactly the kind of interpretation that makes the whole subject feel unreliable. The truth is more grounded and far more useful. Marcus is regulating his nervous system into a state of low physiological arousal. He is moving from anticipatory anxiety, which signals scarcity and threat, into what researchers call a pre-commitment state. His breathing slows, his cortisol drops, his prefrontal cortex becomes more active. That is the part of the brain responsible for reading people, tracking multiple variables, and holding ambiguity without panic. When Marcus walks into that room, He is not hoping the deal works. He has already resolved the emotional question of the outcome. His brain is no longer spending energy on survival calculations. It is spending energy on reading the room. That is a different kind of person to negotiate with. Think about 3 years ago. Think about something financial you wanted and did not get. Not a small purchase, a real thing. A raise, a contract, a loan approval, a business opportunity that required someone else to say yes. Think about how you felt walking into that conversation. There was wanting in your body, a low-level hum of need you probably tried to hide. You may have practiced confidence. But underneath it, the emotional frequency you were broadcasting was one of scarcity. Scarcity has a texture. Other people pick it up before you say a single word. The cost is not just missed deals. The cost is that you were operating with half your cognitive capacity consumed by threat monitoring. You were not fully reading the room. You were performing calm while your brain ran emergency calculations. And the person across the table, whether consciously or not, felt the difference between your performed confidence and their actual confidence. Performed confidence has a slight delay, a fraction of a second of processing before each response. Real certainty has no delay. It speaks before it thinks, because thinking is not required when the outcome feels already settled. This is what emotional net worth actually means. Not what you have in the bank today, but the baseline emotional state you operate from when you encounter financial pressure. Your emotional net worth determines what you notice, what you say yes to, what you negotiate, what you ask for, what you assume is possible. 2 people can sit in the same room with the same information. One will leave with a deal. One will leave empty-handed, not because of preparation, not because of charisma, because of the signal they were sending before they opened their mouths. The radio metaphor from earlier in this book is worth returning to here. Static is not silence. Static is signal without direction. It is frequency without lock. When you walk into a high-stakes moment in a state of wanting, anxiety hidden underneath performance, your signal is scattered. You are broadcasting on 6 frequencies at once and landing clearly on none of them. The other person receives you as noise, not as a threat, not as a peer, as noise. Marcus in his car is locking his frequency. He is not manufacturing false certainty. He is not telling himself the deal is guaranteed. He is finding the emotional state that already contains the outcome as a felt reality, and he is inhabiting it before the evidence exists. This is not magical thinking. It is a deliberate neurological practice. Athletes call a version of it pre-performance activation. Military units call it mission readiness. High-frequency traders practice their own version before major market opens. The label changes. The mechanism does not. Now here is where the genuine revelation lives, and it is precise enough to be uncomfortable. The state Marcus is accessing is not about the deal. It is about identity. He is not visualizing a successful outcome. He is returning to a felt sense of who he already is, a person for whom this deal is consistent with his history, a person for whom this outcome is not surprising, a person who, at the cellular level of his experience, is not waiting to become someone. He already is that someone. The deal is simply the next expression of a reality that began inside him before it began anywhere else. That is the principle. You cannot negotiate from the future if you are living in the survival instincts of the past. Most people bring their entire financial history into every high-stakes moment, every rejection, every shortfall, every time someone said no. That history creates a baseline frequency of low expectation dressed in optimistic language. They say they believe it will work out. Their nervous system says something different. The room feels the nervous system. What Marcus built over 20 years is not just a portfolio. He built a deeply practiced sense of himself as someone for whom wealth is the natural state, not because he always had money. He did not. He grew up with very little. He built that identity through deliberate repetition of the settled state, deal after deal, until the state stopped requiring 20 minutes in a car and became the default mode he woke up in. This is available to you, not as a distant goal, as a practice that begins the next time you sit down with anyone about anything financial. In a later section, we will reach an idea about confidence and how it is earned that pushes directly against the usual belief. After that really registers, it changes how you prepare for every important conversation you have. For now, close the loop on the question asked at the beginning of this chapter. What are they feeling, and how do they get there before the outcome is real? They are feeling the identity, not the outcome. They are accessing the self that already lives at the frequency of the result. And they get there before the outcome is real by practicing the state so many times, in so many contexts, that the state becomes their resting place rather than their destination. The wire clearing is an event. The certainty that precedes it is a practice. You have been treating the feeling of success like a reward that arrives after the money. Every person who has built real financial weight in their life has discovered, usually through failure and not through instruction, that the feeling must come first, not as affirmation, not as a performance of positivity, as a genuine neurological state of settled identity. One that changes the micro-decisions you make, the questions you ask, the pauses you hold, the offers you accept, and the ones you walk away from with no fear of the silence that follows. Marcus does not think of his 20 minutes in the car as preparation. He thinks of it as remembering who he is before the world in the room gets a chance to remind him of who he was. The question worth carrying into the next chapter is not whether you can build this state. You can. The question is what has been preventing you from entering it, and why that barrier feels like protection when it is actually the thing costing you the most. Chapter 4. Certainty is a skill, not a personality trait. Something is leaving you right now, and it is not dramatic enough to feel like a loss. It is quiet. It is the cost of operating in a body that has never been taught to generate certainty on command. Every negotiation you walk into with your shoulders slightly forward and your breath slightly shallow. Every conversation about money where your voice drops half a step and your eye contact breaks first. Each one of those moments is a signal sent, not to the universe in some mystical sense, to the person across from you, and to the oldest part of your own brain. The signal says, I am not sure. When you are not sure, every system inside you reacts accordingly. Your thinking narrows, your options shrink. The decisions you make from that state are smaller than the ones you are capable of making. Here is the part nobody tells you, that smallness compounds. Not violently, not all at once, but steadily, across weeks and months, until the version of you who could have said yes to something large has quietly drifted out of reach. This chapter is about getting that version back, not through belief, through your body. Here is the question that will sit beneath everything in this chapter. Can a person manufacture certainty before they have any reason to feel certain? Hold that question. The answer is coming, and it will change how you move through a room. The barrier the previous chapter named, the one that feels like protection, is mostly physical. You may not have expected that. Most people assume the obstacle between where they are and where they want to be is informational. They think they need a better strategy, a sharper plan, a missing piece of knowledge, and sometimes that is true. But far more often, the missing piece is a state, a specific interior condition from which certain actions become possible and others become impossible. You cannot negotiate from collapse. You cannot commit from fog. The state you are in when you make a decision shapes the decision more than the information you have available at the time. This is not a spiritual claim. It is neurochemistry. Bring to mind the shape of your life before these last 3 years unfolded, not geographically. Think about the version of you that existed then, the decisions that felt available, the ones that felt out of reach, the specific texture of how you moved through your days. Now ask yourself honestly, how much of what felt impossible then was actually impossible? Or was some of it just impossible from the state you were in? The state you woke up in, walked around in, negotiated from, applied for things from. Most people, when they sit with that question, arrive at an uncomfortable answer. The gap was never entirely knowledge. Some of it was always posture. In 2010, a researcher named 𝗜𝗡𝗧𝗘 began publishing findings that made a lot of people uncomfortable. The findings were too simple. She found that holding an expansive, open physical posture for 2 minutes produced measurable hormonal changes in the body. Testosterone levels rose. Cortisol levels dropped. The body moved toward a biochemical state associated with confidence, risk tolerance, and decisive thinking. The research has been contested in the years since, refined and debated, as all good science is. But the underlying mechanism has survived scrutiny in multiple forms. The body and the brain do not operate in one direction only. You are taught to think that the mind generates the feeling, and the feeling produces the posture. That sequence is real, but the reverse sequence is equally real. Posture can generate feeling. Breathing can generate state. Movement can change the neurochemical environment of your brain in under 90 seconds. 90 seconds, not 90 days of positive thinking. Not months of rewriting your subconscious through repetition. 90 seconds of deliberate physical intervention can shift the terrain from which you act. That is the shortcut the manifestation industry swallowed and then forgot to mention. They kept the part about believing. They dropped the part about the body. And in dropping the body, they left you with half a tool and a full-sized expectation. Here is a woman named 𝗓𝗢𝗧𝗘. She runs a small interior design consultancy, 3 years into the business, perpetually one large contract away from breathing comfortably. She had the portfolio. She had the taste, the skill, the references. What she did not have was the meeting. Specifically, she had a meeting scheduled with a commercial developer who could give her firm enough work for 18 months. She had prepared every document. She knew her numbers. She knew his project. And the morning of the meeting, she sat in her car in the parking structure outside his building and felt herself getting smaller. Not dramatically, just the familiar tightening. The voice that ran the quiet calculation, this probably will not go the way I need it to go. She recognized it. She had felt it before. This time, instead of walking inside with it, she did something she had read about and half believed in. She stayed in the car for 90 seconds. She put both feet flat on the floor. She straightened her spine until it felt almost theatrical. She opened her hands and rested them palm up on her thighs. She breathed in for 4 counts and out for 6, slowly, twice. And then she did it again. By the time she stepped out of that car, something had changed. Not her portfolio, not the developer's budget, not her qualifications. What changed was the state she carried into the room. She got the contract. She also got 2 referrals from that same developer over the following year. 𝗓𝗢𝗧𝗘 would tell you she was lucky. She was not lucky. She was calibrated. What 𝗓𝗢𝗧𝗘 accessed in that parking structure is what this book has been calling the pre-breakthrough window. That narrow interval of time just before a consequential moment when your internal state either opens the door or quietly closes it. Most people arrive at that window already in collapse. They spend the interaction trying to perform a confidence they do not feel. The performance is detectable. It costs you something. But there is a different option. You can generate the state before the window arrives. You can stop waiting for something external to make you feel certain and start producing certainty the way a musician produces sound, through practiced, deliberate technique. So let us talk about the protocol, not as a concept, as something you can actually do. The first element is spine and ground. Right now, check the physical position of your back, not in a rigid or unnatural way, but in the sense of whether your spine is organized or collapsed. Collapsed posture sends a steady low-grade distress signal to your nervous system. Your brainstem interprets a caved chest and a forward-dropped head as a threat posture, the body shape of someone who has already lost. Organizing your spine does the opposite. It takes less than 10 seconds. It changes the signal immediately. The second element is breath ratio. When you are in a contracted state, your exhale is shorter than your inhale. Your body is hoarding air the way it hoards resources under perceived threat. Reversing that ratio, breathing in for 4 counts and out for 6 or 7, activates the parasympathetic nervous system. That is the branch associated with calm, clear thinking and the capacity for strategic risk. This is not metaphysics. This is the mechanism by which fighter pilots are trained to make decisions under extreme pressure. The breath is the fastest control lever you have access to. The third element is deliberate movement, not exercise. Movement. Standing from a seated position and physically relocating your body, even to the other side of a room, breaks the neural loop sustaining a contracted state. The brain does not just live in the skull. It reads the environment through the body. Change the body's relationship to space, and you change the information the brain is working with. Now here is where this becomes financial. Your emotional net worth, the interior resource bank you draw on when you need to ask for more, commit to something large, or hold a position when someone tries to negotiate you down, is not fixed. It fluctuates based on the state you are in. People who seem to have natural confidence in money conversations are not naturally different from you. They have, through repetition or through luck, associated their body with a particular state before those conversations begin. They have a ritual even if they cannot name it. The coffee before the call, the walk around the block, the music in the car. These are not superstitions. They are accidental state induction protocols. What you are learning right now is how to do that deliberately, with precision, rather than stumbling into it on good days and losing it on bad ones. This is the difference between a signal and static. A signal is produced by a tuned instrument, one calibrated to a specific frequency and held there with intention. Static is what happens when the instrument is broadcasting, but from wherever the dial landed. Most people approach their most important financial moments from wherever the dial landed that morning. Tired, anxious, distracted, faintly hopeful but not certain. And they wonder why the result feels like noise. Certainty is not a personality type. It is not something you either have or you do not. It is a produced state. A repeatable output of specific physical inputs applied consistently over time. The people you look at and think carry a different kind of confidence were not born with it any more than a musician was born knowing how to hold a note. They learned the inputs. In some cases, they stumbled into them. In some cases, someone showed them the mechanism directly. Now someone has. Before long, we will reach an idea about visualization that pushes directly against the usual belief. Once that becomes real to you, it changes how you actually use the practice. For now, the work is simpler. Before the next consequential moment in your financial life, the application, the ask, the negotiation, the conversation you have been putting off, give yourself 90 seconds first. Spine organized. Exhale longer than the inhale. Body moved through space. Do this not because it feels good, but because it changes the neurochemical terrain from which you act. The state is the signal. The signal precedes everything. The question the next chapter will answer is this: once you know how to produce certainty, what exactly do you point it at? Chapter 5. The pre-breakthrough window is not an accident. Certainty, pointed at nothing, is just noise. That should be obvious. But the entire manifestation industry has spent 2 decades teaching you to generate the feeling of certainty without telling you what to aim it at. That omission is not accidental. The answer to that question is stranger and more specific than anyone selling you a gratitude journal wants to admit. What you are about to hear is not a mindset tip. It is a map of a 72-hour window that appears in the lives of people who make large, sudden financial moves. It appears before the move, not after. Once you understand what that window looks like from the inside, you will recognize it when it arrives in your own life. More than that, you will learn to open it yourself. Here is the question this chapter is built around. It will stay open for a while before it closes. If the emotional state precedes the financial event, what caused the emotional state? Hold that question. Let it sit. You have probably felt something like this before. A day, maybe 2, where everything felt possible in a way that was almost uncomfortable. Not giddy, not manic. Something quieter and more settled than that. A sense of readiness that had no obvious explanation. And then something happened. A call came in, or an idea crystallized, or someone said something that opened a door. You looked back on it later and called it luck. You called it timing. You told yourself the stars aligned. But what if the feeling came first and the event followed it? What if you were not lucky that day? What if you were ready, and readiness is something the world around you can actually detect? That is not a metaphor. That is physiology, behavioral economics, and pattern recognition working together in ways you were never taught to name. Go back to the shape of your life before these last 3 years unfolded. Not where you wanted to be, where you actually were, what you were spending most of your emotional energy on. Whether you were operating from clarity or from a low, persistent hum of financial anxiety, you had grown so used to carrying that you stopped noticing the weight. Most people at that point are not blocked by a lack of opportunity. They are blocked by a nervous system calibrated so long to the frequency of scarcity that when a real signal comes through, a clear one, it gets read as static. The radio is on. The broadcast is there. But the dial is set wrong. This is where Elena comes back into the picture. When we last met her, she was starting to understand that certainty was a producible state, not a reward for prior success. She was practicing it in small windows. 20 minutes in the morning before her inbox opened. A deliberate pause before responding to anything that felt urgent. She was not yet where she needed to be, but she had stopped waiting for permission to feel like someone whose financial life was working. That shift, small as it seemed, was the first crack of light through a specific door. She did not know yet what was on the other side of it. She would find out on a Tuesday. It was an unremarkable morning. She made coffee. She sat down. She did not check her phone. For 40 minutes she held, deliberately and without forcing it, the feeling of having already solved the problem she had been circling for months, not visualizing a solution, holding the emotional texture of resolution. Calm, specific, grounded, By noon, she had received 2 messages she had been waiting on for weeks. Both arrived within the same hour. She almost dismissed it as coincidence. Instead, she wrote it down. What 𝗓𝗓𝗓 was entering, without a name for it yet, is what this chapter calls the pre-breakthrough window. Now 3 composite accounts. 3 people whose financial lives changed in ways that appeared sudden to everyone watching. Trace them backward, not from the moment of change, but from the 72 hours before it. The first is Marcus, a commercial real estate developer in his late 30s who had been pursuing the same acquisition for 14 months. The deal stalled repeatedly. Financing fell through twice. His partners began to quietly lose faith. Then, on a Thursday, everything moved. By Saturday, it was signed. Everyone who heard the story said the timing finally worked out. But Marcus, years later, described the Wednesday before that Thursday differently. He said he had stopped caring about the outcome in a particular way. Not given up, he was precise about that distinction. He said it was more like he had stopped needing the deal to prove something about him. He felt, for the first time in months, that he would be fine either way. That the deal was good and he was going to pursue it, but his worth was not riding on its back. That Wednesday, he made 3 calls he had been avoiding. All 3 moved the needle. By Thursday morning, the whole thing had shifted. What changed on Wednesday was not the deal. What changed was Marcus. The second is a woman named Priya, a tech founder who spent 3 years raising a Series A that never materialized. She describes a specific Friday in her 4th year, 2 days before a meeting that would change everything, where she felt what she called a strange, unwanted peace. She told her co-founder she thought they were going to be fine. Her co-founder thought she meant she had accepted failure. She had not. She meant she had, for 48 hours, stopped operating from the wound. The meeting on Sunday was the same meeting she had given 40 times. She walked in the same. She said nearly the same things. But investors in the room later told her she seemed different, more solid, like someone who did not need them to say yes, even though she very much wanted them to. They said yes. The third is a man named David, 41. He had been building a mid-sized logistics business for 11 years, profitable but plateaued. He describes a weekend, roughly 60 hours before a conversation that tripled his valuation, where he spent most of Saturday doing almost nothing. He took a long walk. He cooked a meal from scratch. He reread 3 letters from clients who had described how his work changed their operations. He was not trying to pump himself up. He was reminding himself, quietly, what was real. Monday morning, he entered a conversation with a potential acquirer not as a man trying to sell something, but as a man who already knew what his work was worth. The acquirer later said the deal was easy. That David walked in knowing his number and held it without apology. David said the number had not changed from the week before. What changed was his relationship to it. 3 different industries, 3 different people, 1 pattern. In every case, the breakthrough was preceded by an internal shift. And in every case, that shift was not accidental. It was the product of specific, repeated behaviors in the 48 to 72 hours prior. Reduced urgency, reconnection to existing evidence of worth, a deliberate loosening of the grip on outcomes while maintaining full commitment to the action. What this creates is not detachment. It is not giving up. It is precision. It is the difference between a hand that shakes and a hand that is steady. And the steadiness allows you to do the same thing with twice the effect. Here is the answer to the question opened at the beginning of this chapter. If the emotional state precedes the financial event, what caused the emotional state? The answer is not external. It was not the weather or the moment or some mysterious alignment of circumstance. In every case, it was a set of deliberate internal moves made in the hours before. The pre-breakthrough window is not something that happens to you. It is something you build with specific materials in a specific order over a specific span of hours. Stop. Think about this honestly for a moment. Have you ever been in a conversation, a pitch, a negotiation, an interview where you could feel yourself needing the outcome too much? Where that need was visible in some way you could not fully hide? Now think about a different conversation, one where the outcome mattered just as much, but you walked in feeling settled. Which conversation went better? You already know the answer. You have always known the answer. What you have not had is a name for the state you were in when it went well, or a method for getting back there on purpose. That is what the pre-breakthrough window gives you. Elena, by the end of the month after that Tuesday, began to map her own version of it. She noticed she needed roughly 36 hours of specific behaviors to reliably enter the state. A reduction in reactive communication. Deliberate engagement with evidence of her own past competence, not affirmations, evidence. Physical stillness paired with mental specificity. She stopped calling it luck when something shifted after she entered that state. She started calling it signal. She had, slowly and without fanfare, begun to tune the frequency with precision. The static was not gone, but she was no longer mistaking it for the broadcast. The pre-breakthrough window is real. It is not mystical. It is not guaranteed, but it is consistent enough across enough lives that ignoring it is the equivalent of knowing a weather pattern exists and still refusing to bring an umbrella. Every major financial inflection point has an emotional precursor, and that precursor can be manufactured on demand. Down the line in this book, we will reach an idea about patience that pushes directly against the usual belief. When that idea snaps into focus, it changes how you act in the specific moments when you are most tempted to wait. For now, one question matters. What would you do differently in the 72 hours before the most important meeting of your financial life, if you knew the meeting's outcome was already being shaped by the state you were in right now? Chapter 6. The Emotional Ledger Nobody Taught You to Keep. Right now, without knowing it, you are paying a tax, not to a government, not to a bank, to a number you have never seen written down, never been asked to calculate, and never been told exists. And that number is compounding against you every single day you do not know what it is. The money you are not making right now is not simply absent. It is specifically absent. It is the client who met you on your worst week and formed a permanent impression. It is the pitch you gave when your chest felt hollow, when your voice had no weight behind it. It is the opportunity that arrived on a Tuesday when you were running on 4 hours of sleep and quiet dread, and you handled it adequately instead of magnificently. Adequately does not close deals. Adequately does not get funded, and the gap between adequately and magnificently is not a skills gap. You already know that. The gap is something else. Something that lives below the surface of every conversation you have about money. This chapter is going to name it precisely, and once it is named, you cannot unsee it. That question at the end of the last chapter is still hanging in the air. What would you do differently in the 72 hours before the most important financial meeting of your life, if you knew the outcome was already being shaped by your current state? Hold that. The answer is coming. But first, you need to understand what is actually being measured in that window, and why most people measure the wrong thing entirely. Here is what nobody in the financial world teaches you directly, though some of the most successful people in that world operate by it instinctively. Your financial net worth is a lagging indicator. That phrase matters. Lagging means it shows up late. By the time you can read it on a bank statement, it already reflects decisions made weeks, months, sometimes years earlier. Most people spend their entire working lives staring at the lagging indicator and trying to fix it there at the surface, where it shows up, rather than at the source where it was created. That is the equivalent of trying to change yesterday's weather by adjusting today's thermometer. The source has a name. Call it your emotional net worth. Emotional net worth is not your mood. Mood is temporary, surface level, and easy to fake. Emotional net worth is something deeper and more structural. It is the habitual baseline emotional state you return to when nothing external is pushing you in either direction. It is your neutral, and your neutral is where all your defaults live, including the ceiling of what you unconsciously accept as financially realistic for a person like you. Not what you say you believe, what your nervous system believes. Those are two different numbers, and most people never close the gap between them. Here is how you measure yours, not with a quiz, with a single honest question asked in a specific way. The question is this: when nothing good or bad is happening, when there is no crisis and no celebration, when it is just a regular afternoon and you are alone with your thoughts, what does money feel like? Not what do you think about money. What does it feel like? Is there a low hum of scarcity, a background static of not enough? Is there a quiet assumption that things will probably work out but not quite as well as you hope? Or is there a settled, unforced sense of capacity, a baseline certainty that you operate from a position of sufficiency even before the good news arrives? That feeling, that specific emotional temperature in ordinary moments, is your emotional net worth. And it predicts your financial ceiling with a precision that most people find uncomfortable when they first confront it. Remember the shape of your life before these last 3 years unfolded. Not the external version, the job title, the account balance. Think about what money felt like in your body on an unremarkable Wednesday. Has that feeling changed? Has the quality of that neutral shifted? Because here is what the data of your own life will tell you. Wherever that neutral sat 3 years ago is very close to where your financial outcomes sat. And wherever it sits right now is very close to where your financial outcomes will sit 3 years from now. The number follows the feeling. Always has. Now, there is a story that illustrates this so precisely that once you hear it, you will start noticing versions of it everywhere. Marcus ran a small logistics company in Detroit. He had a competitor named Devin who ran a nearly identical operation. Same client types, same city, same years in business. Both men needed capital. Both applied to the same regional development fund in the same cycle. Both had clean books. Both presented nearly identical 5-year projections. The review committee saw both pitches within the same week. Marcus walked into his pitch carrying 12 weeks of financial stress. His rent had been renegotiated twice. He had lost a mid-size account the month before. He answered every question accurately, completely, professionally. He hit every number they asked about. But when the conversation moved to the company's 5-year vision, something happened in his voice. It tightened. He kept adding qualifiers. He said things like, assuming we can stabilize the current client base, and of course there are factors outside our control. He was being honest. He believed he was being thorough. What the committee heard was a man who did not quite believe his own projection. Devin walked in 2 days later. Devin had faced similar financial pressure 6 months earlier, but had spent those months actively working something internal alongside the practical work of stabilizing his business. When the committee asked about his 5-year vision, he did not speak louder or use bigger numbers. He spoke with a quality that is hard to describe in financial terms but instantly recognizable in human ones. Settled. Grounded, certain without being arrogant. He said, "This is where we are going. Not this is where we hope to go. Not this is where we plan to go, circumstances permitting." Devin said it the way you say a fact about the past. He got funded. Marcus did not. Same city, same numbers, same committee. What Devin had, Marcus did not lack because he was less intelligent or less capable or less deserving. Marcus lacked it because his emotional net worth, that baseline neutral he returned to in ordinary moments, was sitting too low. And a pitch room is not the place to manufacture a feeling you have not been practicing in the weeks before you walk through the door. This is the invisible mechanism the previous chapter was pointing toward. The 72-hour window matters. But the 72-hour window is really just the last concentrated opportunity to access a state you have been either building or neglecting for much longer than that. Here is the principle stated as cleanly as possible. You cannot sustainably earn above your emotional set point. You can have a windfall above it. You can have a good quarter above it. But you will unconsciously self-correct back toward whatever your nervous system accepts as normal. The self-correction mechanisms are subtle and everywhere. You will underprice. You will delay the follow-up. You will accept terms that do not serve you because some part of you is quietly relieved anyone is interested at all. You will talk yourself out of the larger ask, the better partnership, the bolder version of the plan. Not because you are weak, because your emotional net worth has set a ceiling and you are operating inside it without knowing you are in a room at all. This is where the toxic positivity framework that dominates most manifestation content does real damage. It tells you to feel abundant, to visualize the outcome, to repeat affirmations until the belief solidifies, and then it leaves you stranded. Feeling abundant for 30 minutes in the morning and returning to the background static of scarcity for the other 15.5 hours is not raising your emotional net worth. It is painting a wall with water. The appearance of change is there briefly, and then it is just a wet wall. Raising your emotional net worth is not about affirmations. It is about duration. The question is not whether you can feel capable, grounded, and open to larger outcomes. The question is how long you can hold that state as a baseline before the drift pulls you back down. And that duration is trainable. Specifically, deliberately, measurably trainable. A little later, you will come to a point about confidence and how it relates to financial performance that pushes directly against the usual belief. Once that lands, it shifts how you actually prepare for high-stakes financial moments. For now, start with the measurement. Go back to the question. What does money feel like in your body on an ordinary afternoon? Name it as precisely as you can, not good or bad. Those are too broad. Try specific words: pressured, tentative, open, sufficient, heavy, steady. The more precisely you can name the current baseline, the more clearly you can see the distance between where you are and where your financial outcomes need your emotional net worth to be. Because here is what Devin understood, either consciously or by hard practice, that Marcus did not. The pitch room does not create your state. It reveals the state you arrived with. And the state you arrive with is not built in the elevator on the way to the 14th floor. It is built on every Tuesday afternoon when nothing is pushing you one way or another, and you choose, or do not choose, what emotional frequency you practice living at. The signal does not transmit clearly from static. It never has. Your financial net worth is what the world records. Your emotional net worth is what the world responds to. So the real question, the one that should be keeping you up in the most productive kind of way, is this: what number are you actually walking into every room with? Chapter 7. Gratitude is not soft, it is strategic. The number you walk into every room with is not just confidence or lack of it. It is a broadcast, and the signal you are sending out is shaped, more than almost anything else, by what your brain has been trained to notice first thing in the morning. Here is the counterintuitive truth. Gratitude is one of the most financially powerful practices on earth, and the people who benefit from it most have almost no idea why it works. That sounds like something written on a candle in a yoga studio. It is not. The most effective gratitude practitioners you will ever encounter are not sitting in circles talking about feelings. Some of them are closing deals from private offices, and the practice they never discuss in interviews looks almost nothing like what the self-help industry sold you. It sounds, on the surface, almost absurd, but once you understand the mechanism behind it, you will stop seeing gratitude as a spiritual nicety. You will start treating it as what it actually is, a precision tool for recalibrating what your brain decides to pay attention to. That recalibration has a direct and measurable effect on your financial life. This chapter will show you exactly how. Look back at the season you were in before these last 3 years unfolded. Not the big stuff. The daily texture. What was the first thought you had in the morning? Was it relief or was it dread? Was it a list of what you had or a list of what was missing? Whatever you were broadcasting back then, you were also filtering the world through that same signal. Every person you met, every opportunity that passed near you, every door that was technically open, you were reading all of it through whatever lens your brain had trained itself to use. That lens is not fixed, but before you can change it, you have to see what it has been costing you. Here is the open loop. There is a question at the center of this chapter that most people never think to ask. Not does gratitude work, because enough research answers that. The real question is, grateful for what exactly and in what order and for how long and on what terms? The specifics matter more than the practice itself. Get the specifics wrong and you get the candle-end journal version, which feels nice and changes almost nothing. Get them right and you get something that functions closer to a targeting system. Keep that question in your mind. The answer is coming. Now, the absurd-sounding story. A man named Raymond Chen ran a mid-sized logistics company in the mid-2000s. Not glamorous. Freight management, contracts, long days, thin margins. By most measures, he was doing well, but he had plateaued and he knew it. His business advisor, a woman named Dara, gave him an assignment that made him laugh out loud in the room. She told him to spend 11 minutes every morning writing down 3 things that his business had done right in the previous 24 hours. Not things he was grateful for in his life, not his health or his children. Specifically, his business. What had the business done that was functional, efficient, or better than expected? Raymond thought it was nonsense. He did it anyway. Dara had been right about other things, and he had learned to follow her instructions before judging them. He did it for 6 weeks. Around week 4, he noticed something strange. He was walking through his warehouse and he spotted a routing inefficiency he had walked past for 2 years. He was not looking for it. He just saw it. The fix was simple. It saved the company roughly $40,000 over the following year. Over the next 18 months, he made 3 similar observations. None of them were dramatic. Together, they represented the most profitable period his company had ever had. When Raymond described this to Dara, he used a phrase she had not heard before. He said it was like someone had cleaned his glasses. Let that sit for just a moment. Cleaned his glasses. Raymond was not a spiritual person. He was a pragmatist who kept spreadsheets and hired people based on references. And the best description he could find for what happened to his perception was that something he had always been looking through had finally been cleared. What Dara had assigned him was not a mood exercise. She had, without naming it that way, given him a structured gratitude protocol calibrated specifically to financial signals. And what happened in his brain during those 6 weeks is now well documented in neuroscience literature, even if no one puts it in those terms. Your brain has a filtering system called the reticular activating system. It sits at the base of your brain stem. Its job is to decide, out of the 10 million bits of sensory information hitting you every single second, which 200 or so are worth bringing to your conscious attention. The rest gets discarded. You never see it. You never hear it. It does not exist for you. Your reticular activating system does not filter for truth. It filters for relevance. And it defines relevance based on what you have been emotionally and cognitively focusing on most. Feed it fear and it finds threats. Feed it lack and it finds evidence of what you do not have. Feed it specific, concrete instances of things working financially in your life, and something begins to shift in what it classifies as worth noticing. This is not metaphor. This is not the law of attraction repackaged with a scientific word dropped in. The reticular activating system is measurable, its filtering function is well studied, and the effect of repeated emotional focus on its pattern recognition has been documented in everything from athletic training to clinical depression research. The mechanism is real. Most people just never thought to aim it. What the hollow manifestation industry did was take this legitimate neurological principle and drain it of everything useful. They told you to feel grateful for things you wanted as though you already had them. That instruction fails because it creates a cognitive mismatch your brain recognizes as false. You cannot feel genuinely grateful for a reality that does not exist yet. Not at first. Not in any way that registers as signal rather than static. Your brain knows the difference. The static version of gratitude, the forced, vague, everything is wonderful kind, does not recalibrate your reticular activating system. It just feels better momentarily. That is not nothing, but it is not the tool. The signal version works differently, and it requires 4 specific steps in a specific sequence for a specific reason. Step 1. Name something concrete and financial that functioned in the last 24 hours. Not something big, not something impressive. Something real. A client paid on time. A conversation opened a door. You had a thought about your finances that was clear rather than panicked. Concrete, specific, financial. This is the targeting instruction you are giving your filtering system. You are telling it what category to watch for. You are not manufacturing emotion. You are making an observation that is verifiably true, which is the only way to register as signal. Step 2. Locate where you feel that observation in your body. This sounds strange, but it is not optional. The reticular activating system responds to emotional data, not intellectual data. If you write something down and feel nothing, the instruction does not register with the same strength. You do not need to feel overwhelmed with gratitude. You need 1 second of genuine recognition. A small warmth, a brief sense of relief, a moment of noticing that something worked. Find it. Let it be small. Small and real beats large and manufactured every time. Step 3. Extend the observation 1 step forward. Ask yourself what that small working thing means could be possible in the next 48 hours, not in the next decade. 48 hours. This step pulls your reticular activating system into active scanning mode, specifically for financial opportunity in your immediate environment. You are not visualizing a distant outcome. You are giving your brain a near-term frequency to lock onto. Step 4. Write one sentence that connects what worked to who you are becoming, not who you were. This is the identity anchor. It tells your brain that this category of observation belongs to your self-concept, not just to your circumstances. Self-concept is one of the most powerful filters the reticular activating system uses. If something does not match your identity, your brain literally does not register it as information for you. This sentence closes that gap. Do this for 11 minutes, not 10, not 15. 11 has a specificity to it that signals commitment to your own discipline. The length matters less than the consistency, but consistency without specificity is just journaling. Specificity without consistency is just a good morning. Done together with financial focus, for a period of at least 30 days, this practice begins doing what Raymond Chen accidentally discovered. It cleans the glasses. Here is what closing the loop means. You asked earlier what the specifics were. Grateful for what exactly and in what order and on what terms. Now you know. Grateful for small, real financial evidence. In the order of observation, then feeling, then forward extension, then identity claim. On the terms of your actual current reality, not a fantasy version of it. The specifics are everything. Without them, you are practicing static. With them, you are practicing frequency lock. Further on, you will come to a point about taking action that pushes directly against the usual belief. When that becomes clear, it shifts how you decide when to move and when to stay still. But right now, stay here. The pre-breakthrough window, the period just before something financially significant shifts, is almost always characterized by exactly this. A person whose filter has been recalibrated enough to notice something their previous self would have walked right past. That $40,000 routing inefficiency had been there for 2 years before Raymond saw it. The opportunity did not change. His signal did. What is currently in your environment that your current filter is classifying as irrelevant? Chapter 8. Fear of receiving blocks more wealth than lack of trying. Something is leaving your life right now. It is not dramatic enough to see. There is no crisis, no alarm. It is quieter than that. It is the money, the opportunity, the right connection, the well-timed yes draining away not because you failed to find it, but because something in you refused to hold it. Every week you spend working harder while that refusal stays unnamed is a week the gap gets wider. Not because you are not trying. You are trying. That is almost the painful part. The trying is real. The gap is also real. And the invisible mechanism sitting between them is something almost no one in the manifestation space will name directly. Naming it requires going somewhere most teachers are unwilling to go. This chapter goes there. By the time you finish it, you will have one single question that shows you exactly where your signal is being jammed, and why it has nothing to do with how hard you have been working. That question from the last chapter, what in your environment is your current filter classifying as irrelevant, was about reception. About what you are already missing because your perception is tuned to expect certain things and exclude others. But here is what that question did not address. What happens when the signal comes through clearly? When the frequency is right, when the opportunity arrives, when the door opens, and something in you quietly closes it from the inside. That is where Alina's story ends, and it is also where yours might begin. Alina was 31, running a small digital consultancy out of a one-bedroom apartment in Phoenix. She had been at this for 3 years. 3 years of early mornings and late emails and the kind of grinding patience that deserves more credit than it ever gets. She had read the right books, done the inner work people talk about. Somewhere in month 14, she had found the frequency this book has been describing. Not accidentally, deliberately. She had done the diagnostic work. She had cleared the static. She had stopped broadcasting vague hope and started transmitting a precise signal, a specific financial outcome, a specific kind of partnership, a specific type of client she wanted to build something real with. And then, 8 months later, Marcus called. Marcus ran a mid-sized marketing firm in Scottsdale. He had found Alina's work through a referral, spent 2 weeks reviewing everything she had published, and called on a Tuesday afternoon to propose a retainer arrangement that would have tripled her monthly income within 90 days. The offer was real. The numbers were clear. He had already spoken to his CFO. He was ready. Alina asked for a week to think about it. Then she emailed Marcus a list of concerns about whether her methodology would translate at his scale. Marcus answered every one of them carefully and thoroughly. Alina thanked him and said she needed a few more days. She sent a second list. Smaller concerns this time. Things she later described as her word negligible. Marcus answered again, still patient, still interested. Alina scheduled a call, postponed it once, rescheduled. By the time they finally spoke, she had spent 19 days making a credible-sounding case for why a door she had spent 3 years building toward might need to stay closed a little longer. Marcus moved on, not angrily, just practically. Someone else said yes. Alina sat with that for a long time. What she eventually told a friend was this. She had not been afraid the partnership would fail. She had been afraid it would succeed. And she had not known how to be the version of herself that lived on the other side of that success. That is the mechanism. You can spend years learning to transmit on the right frequency. You can develop the clarity and the specificity and the behavioral alignment this book has been teaching you to build. You can reach the exact moment where the signal comes back, where the universe or the market or the right human being reflects your transmission back at you. And then, in that moment, you can jam your own receiver, not out of laziness, not out of fear of hard work, out of a deep, quiet, usually unconscious conviction that you are not yet the person who receives this. Return to the season you were in before these last 3 years unfolded. Not in your circumstances, not in your bank account, but in how you thought about yourself in relation to money. Ask yourself honestly. When something good happened financially, something unexpected, a check, an opportunity, a compliment from someone whose opinion actually mattered, how long did you let yourself feel it before you found a reason to discount it? How quickly did you explain it away, qualify it, decide it was a fluke? That speed, that reflex. That is the jammer. This chapter opens with one question still hanging in the air from the first minute. The question is this: if unworthiness is the jammer and jamming happens at the moment of reception, then how do you detect a jammer you cannot feel operating? How do you catch something that feels, from the inside, completely rational? The answer lands differently than most people expect. You cannot feel the jammer working because it does not announce itself as fear. It announces itself as logic. It shows up as due diligence. It wears the face of prudence, of caution, of not wanting to move too fast. Every person who has ever sabotaged a financial inflow has had an excellent reason. The reason was never, "I am afraid I do not deserve this." The reason was always something sensible. The timing feels off. I need more information. I want to make sure I am ready. The market might shift. Let me just wait until. Wait until what? This is the distinction that matters most in this chapter. There is a real version of caution that protects you. It is grounded in specific, verifiable information. It says, I see an actual risk. Here is what it is. Here is what I need to know before proceeding. That version of caution is a tool. Keep it. And then there is a different thing that wears caution's face. It generates concerns without clear origins. It creates lists of questions that, once answered, produce new lists. It finds reasons, and the reasons feel airtight, but they multiply rather than resolve. That thing is not protecting you from a bad deal. It is protecting a version of you that cannot afford to be wrong about being small. 𝗓𝗓𝗓 was not protecting herself from Marcus. She was protecting a self-concept built inside 3 years of struggle, and that self-concept did not have a category yet for a Tuesday afternoon phone call that solved the problem. Here is the diagnostic question. One question. Sit with it honestly, and it will show you your jammer with more precision than any journaling exercise or visualization practice can. The question is, what would I have to give up about my current story if this worked? Not what would I gain, what would I have to give up? Receiving at a new financial level does not just add things to your life. It removes things. It removes the identity of someone who is still building. It removes the explanation for why you have not arrived yet. It removes the safety of the almost, the nearly, the I am on my way. Arrival means you are here. And being here means you can no longer defer being the person you said you were becoming. For some people, that deferral has been running for years. It is not comfortable, but it is familiar. And the brain will choose familiar pain over unfamiliar relief almost every time, unless you name what is happening. Naming it is not a small thing. It is the whole thing. Your emotional net worth is the sum of what you believe you are allowed to receive without explanation. Not what you have earned through effort, not what you deserve in some abstract cosmic ledger, but what you believe can arrive in your life without requiring an apology or a caveat or a qualification. When that number is low, even a perfectly tuned frequency cannot hold an incoming signal. The receiver is set to reject anything above a certain amplitude. Unworthiness is not a personality flaw. Read that again. Unworthiness is not a personality flaw. It is a calibration error. It is a receiver setting adjusted by old data, by early experiences of what people like you were allowed to have, by messages absorbed so early you cannot remember absorbing them. It does not mean you are broken. It means your receiver needs recalibration, not replacement. The recalibration does not happen through more wanting. It does not happen through louder declarations or longer vision boards or more confident affirmations. It happens through a single, repeatable act of noticing. When the next door opens, before you build the list of reasons to hesitate, ask yourself the diagnostic question. What would I have to give up about my current story if this worked? Name the thing honestly. Then ask whether that thing is worth more than what is waiting on the other side of the door. 𝗓𝗓𝗓 eventually rebuilt the partnership. Not with Marcus, but with someone whose offer came 14 months later and was larger. What changed was not her circumstances. It was her answer to that question. She knew what she had been protecting. She had named it out loud to herself. And when the new door opened, she walked through it in the same week it appeared. That is what locking the frequency means in practice. Not just transmitting clearly, receiving without interference. Everything this book has built toward, the signal versus static, the pre-breakthrough window, the clarity of precise transmission, all of it lands or fails at this single point, the moment of reception. You can do everything right on the broadcasting end and lose everything on the receiving end. No one around you will be able to see why it keeps not working. They will tell you to keep trying. You will keep trying, and the trying will continue to hit the same invisible wall. Soon, you will come to a point about identity change that pushes directly against the usual belief. After that clicks, it shifts not just how you think, but how quickly you act. But that is next. For now, the question is yours. What would you have to give up about your current story if this finally worked? Chapter 9. Stop manifesting and start inhabiting. Every civilization that ever rose and fell left behind the same quiet evidence. Among the ruins, the records, the letters, and the ledgers, a pattern appears. A small number of people in every age did not seem to work harder than those around them. They did not seem to suffer more or sacrifice more. And yet what they built endured. What they touched expanded. The people closest to them often described the same thing. Not a technique those people used, a quality they carried, something settled, something owned. The ones who watched them could never quite name it, but they could feel it. That quality is what this chapter is about. Not a method, not a morning routine, not a visualization practice you perform and then set down like a tool. Something you become. You have been building toward this since the first page. And if you have felt the previous chapters accumulating inside you like pressure looking for direction, what you are about to read is where that pressure finally finds its shape. That question from the last chapter is still live. What would you have to give up about your current story if this finally worked? Hold it. This chapter will answer it from an angle you have not approached yet. And the answer will close something that has been open for a long time. You started this book learning to tune a radio. Remember that image, static on every channel, the dial in your hand, the signal somewhere out there if only you could find it. That was an accurate picture of where most people begin. They treat frequency like a destination, something to locate, something to visit when the conditions are right, when the mood cooperates, when the circumstances line up. They tune in for 20 minutes in the morning and spend the rest of the day drifting back to static. And then they wonder why the results feel inconsistent. They wonder why the technique works sometimes and not others. The answer was never about the technique. The technique was training wheels. Revisit to the financial instincts you were carrying at that earlier point. Not the numbers, the feeling. The particular weight of checking your account and already knowing what you would find. The low-grade calculation that ran in the background of every decision, every invitation, every opportunity that asked something of you financially. That feeling was not a reaction to your circumstances. That feeling was a signal you were broadcasting continuously, and your circumstances were the antenna picking it up. You were not tuned to static because of bad luck. You were static. That is the distinction that changes everything. Here is where the manifesting industry gets it wrong, and it gets it wrong in a way that costs people years. It tells you to perform a state, visualize the outcome, feel the feeling, repeat the affirmation, act as if. All of those instructions treat the frequency like a costume you put on and take off. And because you are putting it on and taking it off, your nervous system never stops registering the seam between who you are and who you are pretending to be. Your body knows the difference between a performance and a residency. Every cell of your biology knows. Manifesting is what beginners do. Inhabiting is what the wealthy do. That sentence is the core of this chapter. Not wealthy in the shallow sense, not the performance of wealth, not the aesthetic of it. Wealthy in the older, quieter sense. People whose emotional net worth is so stable that circumstances have to reorganize themselves around it. People who do not try to feel abundant. They simply do not feel scarce. The absence of scarcity is not the same as performing abundance. It is a completely different physiological state. It produces completely different decisions, and those decisions produce completely different results. Consider a woman named Clara. She runs a small production company in a mid-sized city. She is not famous. She started with nothing that looked like advantage, no connections, no family money, no formal training in business. What people who worked with her noticed early on was that she never seemed to negotiate from need. She would sit across a table from someone who had far more leverage than she did, and she did not shrink. She was not aggressive. She was not performing confidence. She was simply not available to be diminished. Clients who tried to lowball her consistently found that she responded not with desperation but with patience, as though she already knew how the conversation would resolve, and it always resolved in her favor, not because she won arguments, because she never entered a state where losing felt like the default. The frequency she occupied did not have a channel for that outcome. 10 years in, her company is the most sought after in her region. People describe working with her as feeling inevitable, like things just go right when she is in the room. Clara never called it manifesting. She called it knowing who she was. That is the territory. That is what this chapter is pointing at. The open loop from earlier, what you would have to give up if this finally worked, can close now. Here is what it costs. You would have to give up the identity of someone who is still trying. That identity is more comfortable than it sounds. Trying means you have not failed yet. Trying means the door is still open, the verdict is still out. Trying protects you from the finality of having chosen, but inhabiting does not allow trying. Inhabiting requires that you stop auditioning for the version of yourself that has the life you want, and simply be that person with the information you currently have. Not pretending you have money you do not have. Deciding that money flowing toward you is already consistent with who you are. There is no performance in that. There is only a quiet internal reclassification. Your emotional net worth changes before your bank balance does. Always. Every time. Without exception. This is why two people can learn the same information and produce wildly different results. The one who produces results did not learn it better. They installed it at a different depth. They let it reach the layer where identity lives, not just the layer where behavior lives. Behavior without identity is exhausting. You have to generate it from will every single morning. Identity generates behavior automatically, the way your lungs generate breath without effort, without interruption, without requiring you to remember. You are no longer tuning the radio. The radio is tuned. You are the frequency now, locked, clean, not searching. A locked frequency does not broadcast static between sessions. It does not take breaks. It does not require the right conditions to maintain its signal. It simply is what it is, continuously. And the world responds to what is continuous far more reliably than it responds to what is occasional. There is one final thing the last chapter in this book will ask of you, and it is bigger than anything before it. But before you get there, carry this into everything that follows. The person who inhabited that frequency before they saw results was not deluded. They were precise. They had located the one place where internal and external reality negotiate, and they planted their flag there first. Plant yours now. Not tomorrow. Not after the next paycheck confirms it. Now, with exactly what you know, exactly as you are, in exactly the life that surrounds you at this moment. The signal has always been yours to keep. Chapter 10. You were already broadcasting on the wrong station. You have done the work. That is the thing nobody is going to say to you right now, so let this be the moment it gets said. You showed up. You stayed through the parts that were uncomfortable. You did not skip to the end. And yet, if you are honest, there is still a small voice somewhere underneath all of this progress. Quiet but persistent, asking whether any of it will actually stick. Not whether the ideas are real. You believe they are real. The question is whether you are real enough to hold them. That voice is not wisdom. That voice is static. By the end of this chapter, you will know exactly what to do with it. Not because you will silence it forever, but because you will finally stop mistaking it for the signal. The signal has always been yours to keep. That sentence landed at the end of the last chapter like a door closing behind you. What you may not have noticed is that a door closing behind you means you have already walked through. You are on the other side now. The only question is whether you know it. Here is what most people do at the end of a book like this one. They feel the warmth of the final pages. They set it down. And within 72 hours, the feeling evaporates. Not because the ideas were wrong. Not because they lacked discipline. Because they treated the insight like a destination instead of a frequency. They arrived and stopped transmitting. You remember the vision board. Go back there for a moment. Picture whoever you were when you first learned about visualization, about writing goals down, about putting pictures of houses and cars and bank statements on a board and looking at them every morning. Maybe you did it. Maybe you thought it was foolish but secretly wanted it to work. Maybe it worked for a while and then it stopped and you quietly blamed yourself. The board was never the problem. The problem was the emotional static running underneath every glance at that board. You would look at the image of the life you wanted, and somewhere beneath the surface, a counter-signal was firing. A hum of doubt, a flicker of unworthiness, a habit of disbelief so old it had become invisible. You were not broadcasting a clear signal. You were broadcasting the goal wrapped in interference. And interference does not attract, it repels. Picture the season you were in before these last 3 years unfolded, not in terms of what you had or did not have, in terms of what you believed was actually possible for you, not what you hoped for, what you genuinely, quietly, in the ordinary moments of your life, believed was probable. That gap between hope and probability, that was the static. That was the wrong station. You have been paying for it not in failure but in friction. Everything working a little harder than it needed to. Every opportunity arriving slightly sideways. Every good thing requiring twice the effort it should have taken. That changes today, not metaphorically, practically. Here is what the frequency actually requires from you each morning. It takes 10 minutes. Not because 10 minutes is magical, but because 10 minutes is long enough to shift your default and short enough that you will actually do it. The first 2 minutes are silence, not meditation, not breathing exercises, just stillness long enough for the noise of the morning to settle. You are not trying to think positive thoughts yet. You are clearing the channel. The next 3 minutes are what you might call emotional location. You ask yourself one question and sit with the honest answer. The question is this: what does it feel like to already be the person who has what you are building toward? Not what does it look like. Feel the weight of the certainty, the ease of it. The ordinary Tuesday afternoon quality of a life you are no longer chasing because you are already living it. You are not pretending, you are practicing. There is a meaningful difference, and your nervous system knows which one you are doing. The following 3 minutes are decision. You choose one action, one concrete, specific, completable action that the person you just located in your imagination would take today without hesitation. Not a plan. One action. You write it down. You do not negotiate with it. The final 2 minutes are declaration. One sentence, spoken aloud or written, that names who you are right now, not who you are becoming, who you are. This is not affirmation as performance. This is identity as instruction. You are telling your behavior where to report. A woman named Clara did something close to this without knowing the name for it. She was 31, running a small alterations shop out of a strip mall in a mid-sized city. She had a number she had written in her planner every January for 4 years. The number represented the revenue she wanted her shop to generate. For years it sat there, ringed in the same red ink, visited and then abandoned. One morning, she stopped writing the number and started writing a sentence instead. The sentence was not about what she wanted. It was about who she was. She wrote that she was a woman who ran a shop that people crossed town to visit. She wrote it because she had felt, for just a moment the day before, the absolute certainty of that being true, not hope. Certainty. She chased that feeling, not the number. Within 14 months, she had opened a second location. The number she had written 4 times in red ink became a quarterly figure, not an annual one. The plan had not changed. She had. That is what locking the frequency looks like in an ordinary life. Here is the open loop this chapter quietly introduced and has not yet closed. You heard early on that the static was the problem, not the board. But there is a harder version of that truth. One that deserves to be said plainly because you have earned it. The static was never random. Static is a signal too. It is just a signal from an older version of you, the version that learned to protect itself by staying small, by expecting less, by treating hope as dangerous because hope had disappointed before. That older signal is not evil. It is loyal. It kept you safe in a world where you once needed that kind of safety. But you are not in that world anymore. You built your way out, one chapter at a time. And now the most important thing you can do is stop letting a signal that belongs to your past speak on behalf of your future. The frequency was never hidden from you. You were simply tuned to the wrong station. The right station was always broadcasting. It did not require a secret, or a ritual, or permission from someone who had already arrived. It required you to stop confusing the noise for the music. It required you to recognize that certainty is not something that comes after the evidence. Certainty is what you bring to the moment before the evidence exists. That is what every person who built something real from almost nothing was actually doing. Not believing harder, not wanting more, arriving emotionally at a destination before their bank account confirmed the address. That is the frequency. That is what this entire book has been moving toward. You are not at the beginning of something. You are not even in the middle. You have crossed a threshold that most people circle their whole lives without stepping through because they are waiting for proof before they claim the signal. You have stopped waiting. So here is the only thing left to be said. It is yours to carry forward now. Not as motivation, not as comfort, but as the plain and accurate description of who you are in this moment. You are someone who broadcasts with intention. Let that land. Do not rush past it. Do not reach for the next thing. Sit in it the way you would sit in a room that finally felt like home after a long time of searching. The stillness after this sentence is not empty. It is the signal.